with Plugger. 3 more goals before he breaks that record. Patrick, I believe you've got some keen questions to ask on Sydney's future and football in general in New South Wales.
Well, Richard, the AFL is beginning to sort of tinker with a licence for a second club out of Sydney, which suggests that it may be happening, a club may be relocated sooner rather than later. How does it fit with your time frame, given that your 2 hats, Swans chairman and you're with the New South Wales Commission?
2 hats, not 2 heads. Let me emphasise, I have no philosophical problem with a second team or a third team. My concern is that it's done correctly, and by correctly I mean that it doesn't put at risk the 18 years of work that's occurred. I mean, the amount of money and blood and sweat and tears that's been invested in trying to get a team established in Sydney can't be discounted. And I personally think the Swans are probably 5 years away from being capable of standing on their own 2 feet indefinitely. But the other aspect of it is why are you going to have a second team there? And I think the AFL has to be able to articulate that better than it's done thus far. And surely it's got to be about developing the game. I mean, I don't think there's anything magical in having a second, a third or a 10th team in Sydney unless there's some rationale for it. And I think where some of the verbal jousting has occurred between Greg's team and mine has been because we've been operating in a vacuum. The rules are not known. The Kangaroos see an opportunity and good luck to them. I don't begrudge what they're doing. What I'm on about is I think the AFL does have to be better at articulating what its game plan is.
Well, Graham, what is the game plan for Sydney?
I think it's still being formulated, Patrick. It is quite clear that with a population of 4 million in Sydney that we need to be able to address it in a very serious way in terms of tapping a much larger section of the population that perhaps is tapped by playing 1 game there on average every 2 weeks, 11 games a year. That says that if you could play a game in Sydney once every week throughout the season, then we would be servicing that Sydney population a lot better than what we're doing at the moment. Now, how you do that is the big question we're asking. Now, there's a number of ways. You can either have Sydney play more games in Sydney. That is, you'd have to start shifting some home games of Melbourne clubs or other clubs to Sydney and have Sydney, for example, Sydney plays Collingwood in Sydney. Now, can Collingwood play Sydney in Sydney, and you end up with 2 Sydney games? That'd be one way of doing it.
Graham, 5 years away, 3 years away, or what? What's the...
I don't think you put a time frame, but I'd have to agree, Trevor, with what Richard has said, that what we need to do, in a sense, the Kangaroos came to us with a proposal to play some more games in Sydney this year, and I have to say to them that their initiative is something that we ought to commend and we ought to give a lot of support. But what I think the Commission now has to do is to really look at how we're going to tackle the further expansion into the Sydney market. We've already had the task force headed by Terry O'Connor. It's looked at the grassroots expansion. It looked in a brief sense at the issue of a second team or of playing more senior competition games. The real issue I think now is for us to examine how we actually do it. Do we have Sydney playing more games? Do we put a second team there? If a second team is going to be there, where does it locate itself?
But Graham, for all that, I mean, Sydney's crowds this year have actually been down. I mean, you know, it seems like there's a growing interest in the code in the northern states, but Sydney's crowds are down. Isn't that a concern? Why are the crowds down?
Well, I think it's a bit like state of origin, Ryan. You wouldn't want to make your decisions based on state of origin based on Saturday's attendance, and similarly, you wouldn't want to make decisions about development of the game in New South Wales based on sort of crowd attendances, which might reflect in part
but
the...
why are they down?
Well, they haven't played the heavyweight Victorian teams up there this year, have they? Who've been they haven't played.
It's a little greater than that. The crowds in '97 were less than they were in '96, and the crowds in '98 were less than they were in '97, and this season thus far they are less than they were in '98.
Well, doesn't that represent a trend?
I think it's. I don't know that it represents a trend. I think it represents a be wary sign, and that's what I think Richard's very point is. Look, don't bank that the Swans have got absolutely stable and nothing can go wrong. I mean, the Swans this year, despite the nonsense was written by the Institute of Chartered Accountants about 2 weeks ago when they reviewed the profitability of all of the clubs in Australia, had Swans as #2 profitable club in Australia. The Swans just broke even in 1998, which is a great result after the efforts have gone past in prior years. But the Swans are now marginally have their assets exceeding their liabilities. They're just starting to break even in a P&L sense. They have a long way to go to be a strong club within the AFL.
And isn't it a bit disappointing, and Graham, that the whole strategy this year has been a little bit ad hoc, particularly given the pretty disgraceful history of how Sydney began in Sydney anyhow? Hasn't it been a little bit unfair on the Kangaroos to almost, I know they put their hands up, but they almost have been scapegoats in a sense?
No, look, that's nonsense, Caroline. The Kangaroos,
Well, I don't think it is.
the Kangaroos should be credited for seeing an opportunity and grasping it. And the AFL does have to develop a long-term plan, a licence, an agreement whereby if clubs want to play in Sydney, they have to undertake certain clinics, they have to promote in certain areas, they have to make sure the cake gets bigger rather than cannibalise the Sydney Swans cake. Now, within all of that...
Force, and they put forward a game plan, and which said Sydney wasn't ready for a second team, and you all but ignored that advice.
Well, we are unashamedly opportunistic. When the Kangaroos came to us and said we'd like to play 4 home games in Sydney for each of the next 2 years, that fits with playing more games in Sydney. They have not, at this point, agreed to relocate, but we do want more people in Sydney to see more AFL football.
Greg, does it concern you that already we're seeing the signs of the 2 clubs up in Sydney right now at loggerheads publicly, given what's happened with the rugby?
That is not true.
Well, we've seen stuff in the public domain.
It doesn't matter, Trevor, how often you say that. It is not true. They did go through a rough patch initially. That's why we're trying to get agreements in place, and no amount of you guys saying that they're at loggerheads is going to make it so.
Well, they could stop telling us they're at loggerheads then.
North Melbourne, nay North Melbourne now Kangaroo.
You hate the Kangaroos, don't you?
Oh, I've just had a nasty experience with a kangaroo at the zoo when I was young. Richard, how do you feel that the Kangaroos have picked up 3,000 new members in Sydney?
Well, that's of no concern, Michael. We've had to cap our membership. I think the focus is, and this is the problem, I think, with football, everything's so short-term, it's all week to week. We're talking about the future of the game, and the future of the game, if we are going to be a genuinely national game, and in my humble opinion, if we're not, then this game will become, and I know this is probably heresy in Melbourne, this game in 25 to 50 years will become irrelevant. There's no game in the world that's quasi-national. I mean, virtually every game now has to be international to survive. The big prizes in Sydney, there has to be a medium to long-term focus. I have absolutely no problem whatsoever with the Kangaroos or anyone else being there. I come back to what I said before. In the absence of a clear game plan, I get twitchy. I get twitchy wearing the Swans hat, and I get twitchy wearing my sort of bigger picture hat. But I just want to comment on something that Anthony said earlier, this vision for this, you know, the best versus the rest. And there seems to be a view that's, that exists elsewhere in Australia, that this game is so great that put it on in Sydney and people will come. I mean, I've got to say, after 18 years, I would have thought the message would have got through. I listened to Bruce McAvaney and Graham Corns a couple of weeks ago, prior to the Kangaroos playing their first game at home. And Graham Corns is a man who I've got great respect for. Graham Corns was saying, there must be 2 teams. There's 4 million people, end of the story. And Bruce McAvaney was saying, it's a promoter's dream. There's got to be a full house. There is a huge job to be done. Greg and I, and the teams that we're associated with, effectively have to double the number of people coming to games in the next 2 years to make this thing work. We're playing games at Homebush. To be viable at Homebush, we've got to go from 25,000 to 50,000. The Kangaroos, let me finish. Sorry. The Kangaroos presumably are looking in the next few years to have crowds of 20 to 25,000. We're talking about crowds, an extra 40 or 50,000 people over and above the number of people that are coming to games at the moment. There is a massive job to be done.
I thought I saw you 2 blokes hugging each other before. Greg, can you just tell us, was there a blue between the 2 clubs, and is there now?
I think the point of difference has been mentioned, the fact that, and the word cannibalising the market's been used a lot in the press and even tonight. We see it a bit differently. You know, we understand our role is to expand the market, but in the initial phase, we had to make ourselves available to everybody. We had to make sure the crowds come through the gate, and we unashamedly tried every tactic we could. And we don't want to go back any of those tactics, and sure, there were some problems early doors, but I agree. We have to both. We have to find new markets. Out west is the obvious area.
Greg, were you concerned that if you didn't find this new market or you didn't get a new market to attack, that your football club was going to go under short to medium term?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about the amount of support we have in Melbourne for a start. It's probably 5%. It's not enough. It's not enough for the future. And while we're successful on the field, we had to take the opportunity to find new markets. Now, we addressed the merger in '96. It failed. Our next issue was to go to the biggest city in Australia.
But isn't it inevitable that you will end up playing all your games in Sydney?
No, it's not inevitable
Well,
at all,
if it is
Ron.
inevitable, why won't you guarantee that you won't?
Can I just ask you a question, Ron? Can I just ask you a question, Ron? Look, yeah, there were blues and there'll continue to be blues, like there are blues between 16 clubs.
There were no blues.
Oh, Trevor, I'm telling you, there were blues and there will continue to be blues.
On the record?
There's absolutely no question about that. But the focus is on personalities and short-termism when we're actually talking about the future of the game.
Yeah, well, that question was a very important one about the future of the Kangaroos. Why won't the club guarantee, beyond any doubt, that they will always be based in Melbourne?
We have guaranteed that to our members. We're saying that we're going here on a 5-year experiment to play the game, to increase our supporter base, and it gives us a strong position to make sure that we're looking after the future of the club that our members own.
And no chance that after the 5 years you will then relocate permanently to Sydney?
It's not on our agenda at the moment, Ron, no.
But it could be in 5 years?
I can't predict that. All I can say is that now, as a board and as administrators and the people who are being trusted to run this club, that's our decision at the moment.
If a second team goes to Sydney, the most obvious candidate is the Kangaroos. Do you agree with that?
At the moment, I guess we agree.
Can I just ask a question on that? Because I'm interested to hear from the Commission as to the strategic thinking in this planning so far. Because if this growth, this market, is going to be attacked or challenged, is it going to be done through organic growth, through relocation? What are the social engineering problems in relation to players moving cities, etc., infrastructural changes, etc.? Has this been part of the strategic thinking?
Well, I would have thought, look, if we can leave the Kangaroos aside,
definitely leave them aside.
Greg's covered that. I would have thought when players are receiving, on average, $110,000 come 1999 season, I would have thought on average there won't be any difficulty in getting players young men to relocate if you have to. We would have thought that in a city of 4 million people, if we've got 16 teams in a national competition, as we intend to have for the foreseeable future, 2 of those teams ought to be coming out of Sydney at some future time. I don't see any social engineering problems. I mean,
the facts are there were problems 18 years ago. There have always been problems. When you've got a draft structure as we have today, that's fine. Understand the rules. Everybody abides by the rules. What you're talking about here now is a totally different set of rules, totally different structure.
Damien, if I can say that 18 years ago I was involved in that move and the players were getting $30 a game and they had careers and everything else. It was a far bigger change than it would be now if it happened.
Can I ask Damien, sorry, let me just try and give you a bit of a potted version of what our strategy might be. The first thing is the players have become in this national competition much more mobile. Mobile on a permanent basis, mobile on a temporary basis, week by week. But if you look at Sydney, 4 million people, 2 million, if you like, in the east or broadly in the east and 2 million in the west. We're tapping very well with the Sydney Swans at the moment. As I say very well in relative terms, those living in broadly the eastern suburbs that will focus on the Sydney Cricket Ground and Moore Park and that area. We actually haven't tapped at all, in any significant sense, those in the west. And all the analysis that's coming to us, including from our television broadcasters, says that the west is not well tapped. Now, you've got Homebush Stadium created. Sorry?
Many sports have tried before you to tap the western suburbs of Sydney.
Well, I understand that, but you've now got a superb stadium out there in Homebush Stadium, so you've got a place to actually go to watch the game. And it seems to me that if you can actually start focusing on how we tap that, now it may well be that the way to tap it is to use the strength that's there at the moment and to have the Sydney Swans move into that area itself. Keep the foundation that it's got in the eastern suburbs, but move much more to the west to try and tap that base. It may be the alternative is to actually have a team that is prepared to dedicate itself to that area, not to try and cannibalise. Cannibalisation doesn't actually help us in terms of the expansion into the city market, but to focus on moving into the western suburbs, focus on Homebush as a home base, and see if that base can't be tapped. That's the sort of analysis we'll go through over the next few months, year, 2 years.
I accept all that. The essence of the question is, can it occur through organic growth, or must it only occur through a relocation of a team?
When you say organic growth, what do you mean?
Development. Development of a Sydney-based team, or must it be a relocation?
It's got to be a relocation.
Yeah, I think it's got to be. I must say, I think it's got to be a relocation. I think to start creating a team from afresh, first of all, it throws the structure of our competition out, in the sense that I think we've all now got to a position that a 16-team competition is about right. If you create a new team, then you're talking about a 17-team competition with all the complications associated with that, and there's a whole range of them, not only scheduling, but there's financial complications. So you're really, I think, taking a position that says, if we have a team in Melbourne that can see a significant strategic advantage in being able to tap into the Sydney market, then let's give them all the encouragement they can.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. Well, we're heading for half-time. We're going to take a break. After the break, back with plenty more issues, including Docklands.